The red dust of Gale Crater didn't just coat the boots of the Ares 4 landing party, it seemed to actively resent them. Miller Ross stood by the primary harvester, observing the rhythmic vibration of the drill as it bit deep into the permafrost. At 61, Miller was the oldest man to ever set foot on another world, a distinction he felt in the persistent ache of his lower back and the metallic tang of recycled oxygen that never quite left his throat. He had spent his entire life searching for the spark of life in the cosmos. What he had found instead were the cold ashes of a global execution. He stared at the readout on his handheld sensor. The isotope ratios weren't just skewed, they were fundamentally impossible. It wasn't that Mars had simply lost its atmosphere to solar winds or a cooling core. Those were the comforting lies of early 21st century geologists. The data suggested a sudden, violent cessation of all biological processes. A total sterilization. It looked less like an evolutionary dead end and more like a crime scene where the evidence had been bleached from existence. Miller ran a gloved hand over the jagged edge of a rock, feeling the vibration of the ship's cooling fans through the thin soles of his boots. The universe, he realized with a cold, sinking clarity, wasn't a garden waiting to be seeded. It was an organism equipped with an incredibly efficient immune system. The Ares 4 began its ascent 3 days ahead of schedule. The decision sat heavy on Miller's shoulders, backed by Commander Anna Brown, a woman who had navigated 3 decades of missions and knew the scent of a dying ship before the alarms ever triggered. They were carrying more than just core samples. They were carrying the realization that the Great Filter wasn't a metaphor. It was a biological reality. As the Martian horizon dipped away, replaced by the velvet black of the void, Miller watched the telemetry screens. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, uneven rhythm that reminded him of the pacemaker he'd successfully hidden from the flight surgeons for years. They were 4 days out from Earth when the long-range comms went silent. It wasn't a technical glitch, but a hard disconnect from the Geneva Gate. The silence was heavy, vibrating with the weight of an unspoken sentence. When the signal finally returned, it wasn't a welcome home. It was a quarantine order issued by the United Nations Planetary Defense Council. The Earth's orbital railguns, designed to deflect extinction-level asteroids, were being slaved to the Ares 4's trajectory. Their own home, the blue marble Miller had dreamed of for 18 months, was treating them like a pathogen. The stellar immunity theory wasn't just something they had discovered on Mars. It was something that had just been activated on Earth. The vibration in the deck plates of the Ares 4 had changed. It was a subtle shift, a frequency move from a low, comforting thrum to a jagged, high-pitched whine that Miller Ross felt in the very fillings of his teeth. Miller had been around machines his entire life, from the diesel tractors of his youth in Iowa to the liquid hydrogen engines of the late 20th century. He knew when a piece of hardware was screaming in protest. He drifted through the narrow connector towards the bridge, his movements economical, a ghost of the grace he'd possessed before gravity and decades of academic posture had claimed his spine. The air in the corridor smelled of ozone and the slightly sweet, cloying scent of the CO2 scrubbers working overtime. Commander Anna Brown was hunched over the primary comm station, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a utilitarian bun that seemed to defy the lack of gravity. Her eyes were fixed on a scrolling waterfall of encrypted data coming from the Geneva Gate, the orbital hub that managed all deep space traffic. "They aren't answering the handshake, Miller," Anna said, her voice a calm, low rasp. It was the voice of a woman who had landed damaged shuttles in crosswinds. "They've switched to a hardline tactical frequency, high-band, military-grade encryption, the kind we only use for debris-clearing lasers or kinetic interceptors." "They're painting us," Miller said, the words feeling like dry stones in his mouth. "Worse, they've locked the docking collars at the gate, and the lunar relay just went dark for us. We're being scrubbed from the network." Miller pulled himself to a grab bar, peering out the reinforced polycarbonate port. Somewhere ahead of them, hidden in the glare of the approaching sun, was Earth, a blue marble that represented everything they had fought to protect. But as he looked at the data on his own tablet, the stellar immunity hypothesis he'd formulated in the dust of Mars began to take on a terrifying local shape. "It's the protocol," Miller whispered. "Anna, look at the transmission headers. They aren't using NASA or ESA codes. This is WHU Omega, Biological Containment Level 5. We passed every screening before we left Mars, Miller. We're clean. You ran the sequences yourself. I ran the sequences for known pathogens, Miller countered, his voice rising with a frantic edge he couldn't quite suppress. I was looking for bacteria, viruses, prions. I was looking for life. I didn't realize that life itself isn't the threat. The threat is the correction. He tapped a command on his screen, pulling up the 3D model of the Martian core samples. On the screen, the molecular structure of the Martian soil didn't look like mineral deposits. It looked like an immune system's discarded shell. Mars didn't die because of a lack of water, Miller explained. It died because it reached a certain threshold of biological complexity. Once a planet becomes infected with enough life, the universe triggers a localized entropic collapse. It's a cosmic autoimmune response. And Anna, we brought the antigens back with us. The silence that followed was broken by the sharp, rhythmic ping of the proximity sensor. A small, high-velocity object was closing in from the direction of the moon, a kinetic kill vehicle. They're not even going to talk to us, Anna said, her fingers flying across the navigation console. They're going to vaporize us in the middle of the transition. Miller moved to his workstation, his mind racing through the biological data. He remembered the way the Martian dust had reacted to the introduction of Earth-based organic compounds in the lab. It wasn't a chemical reaction. It had been an informational one. The dust didn't kill the bacteria. It rewrote it. Anna, give me the internal sensors for the cargo bay, Miller commanded. The screen flickered to life. The cargo bay was bathed in a strange, pale luminescence. It was a soft, rhythmic pulsing coming from inside the sealed lead canisters. It looked like a heartbeat. The missile isn't the problem, Miller said. Look at the hull integrity sensors, Anna. The high-strength aluminum-titanium alloy of the Ares 4's outer skin was thinning. It was being dissolved. The ship's own structure was being converted into the same crystalline dust they had found on Mars. The immunity response isn't just a metaphor, Miller said. It's a physical process, and it's already started. The ship lurched violently. The first kinetic strike wasn't a direct hit. It was a warning shot, a tungsten rod passing close enough to create a gravitational shear that rattled the Ares 4 to its bones. They're ranging us, Anna shouted. Next one will be a center mass hit. Miller was staring at the heartbeat in the cargo bay. He saw the way the light pulsed in perfect synchronization with his own irregular heartbeat. His pacemaker. He looked at the communications array. If he could broadcast a countersignal, something that mimicked the sterile state of the universe, maybe he could trick the Earth's defense systems, and the universe itself. I need to patch the medical telemetry directly into the main comms dish, Miller said. I need to broadcast a flatline signal, for the ship, for us, for everything. You'll fry the comms, Anna warned. We'll be blind and deaf. We're already ghosts, Anna. We just haven't realized it yet. As Miller began to strip the wires from his own chest monitoring unit, he looked at the primary view screen. The Earth was closer now. But as he watched, a dark shadow began to crawl across the western hemisphere. It was a shimmering, iridescent veil, the same light he had seen in the cargo bay. Across the vast blue ocean, a massive geometric pattern was forming in the water, a white, crystalline structure miles wide. Miller jammed the wires into the comms relay. The ship screamed. The lights died. The impact never came. Instead, the Ares 4 ceased to have momentum. The feeling of weightlessness was replaced by a crushing, absolute stillness, as if they had been embedded in a block of ice. Then, a voice came through the emergency backup speaker. It was a voice that sounded like 1,000 whispers layered over one another. The containment has failed, the voice said. The infection has reached the threshold. Evolution will now be corrected. Miller looked at Anna, but she was already gone, replaced by a shimmering pillar of fine, red dust that held the shape of a human woman for only a second before the ventilation system whisked her away. He was alone in the dark. The alarm on his pacemaker began to beep, a steady, panicked sound. Then, the door to the bridge hissed open. But there was no one on the other side, only the red dust of Mars flowing into the room like a rising tide. The silence on the bridge of the Ares 4 was no longer the sterile, pressurized quiet of a vacuum-rated vessel. It was thick and granular, Miller Ross stood paralyzed, his lungs burning with the need to breathe, yet terrified that the act of inhalation would draw the remains of Anna Brown into his chest. The red dust, what was left of a woman who had survived 3 decades of orbital maneuvers and a divorce that had cost her more than the vacuum ever could, floated in the microgravity like a cloud of fine paprika. It caught the emergency lighting, shimmering with a dull, coppery malevolence. Miller's hand went instinctively to his chest, his fingers digging into the thin fabric of his flight suit. Beneath the skin and muscle, the small titanium box of his pacemaker gave a sharp, rhythmic jerk. Thump hiss, thump hiss. It was a dirty signal, a mechanical intrusion into a body that was supposed to be undergoing correction. He looked at the bridge's primary status board. Most of the displays were dead. The liquid crystals bled out into dark, bruised smears. But one auxiliary screen, powered by a hardened backup battery, still flickered. It showed the ship's exterior hull cameras. The Ares 4 was no longer a spacecraft. It was being rewritten. The sleek white ceramic tiles and reinforced alloys were melting, not from heat, but from a fundamental change in molecular priority. The hull was becoming translucent, turning into a lattice of crystalline structures that looked like frozen smoke. The ship was being turned into a giant sensor array, a biological antenna tuned to the frequency of the sterilization event. Miller stumbled toward the comm station, his boots clicking on the deck plates. The sound was wrong. Instead of the dull thud of rubber on metal, it was the sharp tink of glass on glass. He looked down. The floor was turning into a dark, obsidian-like substance. "Computer," he croaked. His voice was a dry rattle. "Log entry. Medical Officer Miller Ross. Commander Anna Brown is... She is non-viable. The ship is undergoing a level 6 structural reconfiguration." There was no response from the AI. The voice he had heard earlier, the 1,000-layered whisper, hadn't come from the ship's speakers. It had come from the vibration of his own eardrums. He turned his gaze to the main view screen. The Earth was no longer a blue marble. The iridescent veil he had seen earlier had expanded, a shimmering shroud that now covered 60% of the planet's surface. From this distance, it looked like a cataract growing over an eye. "Stellar immunity," Miller whispered. "It's not just a defense mechanism. It's an ice age, a hard reset." Miller pushed off from the comm station, drifting toward the avionics bay. He needed to understand why he was still intact. He reached the medical diagnostic suite and jammed his arm into the bio readout sleeve. The machine groaned, but the screen hummed to life. The readout was a chaotic mess of wave patterns. The pacemaker wasn't just keeping his heart beating. It was creating a localized electromagnetic noise that was interfering with the conversion process. He was a glitch in the universe's software. He needed to get to the cargo bay. The Martian core samples, the antigens, were the source of the broadcast. As he moved, the environment became increasingly alien. The corridors had widened into the sweeping, organic curves of a cathedral made of bone and glass. He reached the heavy bulkhead leading to the cargo bay. It was no longer a door. It was a membrane, a thin, vibrating sheet of translucent matter pulsing with a soft amber light. Miller took a deep breath, clutching a portable defibrillator unit. He stepped through. The cargo bay was gone. In its place was a vast, hollow sphere. At the center, suspended in a web of shimmering filaments, were the lead canisters of the Martian samples. They were open now, their contents transformed into a single, glowing orb of pure information. The orb pulsed in time with the patterns on Earth. "The anomaly will be resolved. The signal will be purified." The filaments reached for him, thin as spider silk but strong as steel. They wrapped around his ankles, his waist, his throat. Miller looked at the defibrillator in his hand. He had seconds left. "Resolution denied," Miller hissed. He slammed the defibrillator paddles against the glowing orb and triggered a maximum joule discharge. The explosion was pure white noise. The orb shattered into a million jagged fragments of light. The Ares 4 buckled. The ice over Earth began to crack, but the feedback traveled back through the paddles, straight into Miller's chest. The pacemaker exploded inside his ribcage. Miller fell to the floor, his heart fluttering, a dying bird trapped in a cage of broken titanium. Through the wreckage of the ship's comms, A human voice bled through. Ares 4, this is Geneva Gate. We see you. God help us, we see you. We are launching recovery teams. Do not, I repeat, do not attempt to dock. Miller watched as a final jagged shard of the Martian orb floated toward him. It hovered inches from his face, and for a moment, he saw a reflection in its surface. It wasn't his own face, it was Anna's, and she was screaming. Then, the shard turned black. The pain in Miller Ross's chest was no longer a sharp spike. It had evolved into a dull, rhythmic grinding. Every breath was a negotiation with the vacuum. He lay on the glassy floor, staring at the ceiling of the transformed cargo bay. The Ares 4 was a wounded animal, a hybrid of human engineering and cosmic biology that didn't know how to die. Miller rolled onto his side, a groan escaping his lips. He needed a stimulant, or a direct bypass of the scorched leads in his chest. Miller. The voice didn't come from the speakers. It came from the floor beneath him. Anna, he whispered. Miller. Look at the walls. It's not dust. It's memory. He forced himself up, his vision swimming. He looked at the crystalline bulkhead. Within the translucent layers, he saw shapes. They were flickers of color, the blue of a flight suit, the silver of a wedding ring, the line of a mission patch. Anna wasn't gone. She had been digitized, her biological information converted into the very structure of the ship. The medbay, the vibration replied. The emergency bypass kit in locker 4B. Go. He dragged himself toward the exit. The trek felt like a cross-country hike through a nightmare. He reached the medical alcove, protected by lead shielding that had accidentally served as an umbrella against the stellar immunity broadcast. Miller fumbled with the latch of locker 4B and grabbed the emergency bypass kit, a portable pacing unit with needle-tipped leads. He jammed the first needle through the blackened skin of his chest, aiming for the subclavian vein. He screamed as the second needle went in. He flipped the toggle. Click. Whir. A jolt of 300 volts slammed into his chest. His heart caught the rhythm. Thump, click, thump, click. I'm still here, he panted. Ares 4, come in. The voice from the comms was clearer. This is Captain Halloway of the Valkyrie. Miller, the UNPDC has issued a terminal sanction. We cannot allow that ship to enter the lunar gravity well. Miller reached for the comms headset. Halloway, I've stopped the broadcast. Look at your telemetry. The ice growth on Earth is retreating. It doesn't matter, Miller. Halloway's voice was devoid of emotion. The ship is a biological hazard. We're going to tow you into a decaying orbit. You'll burn up in the atmosphere. Miller looked at the screens. The Valkyrie was moving in, a massive magnetic tether extending from its belly. Miller. Anna's vibration was back. Don't let them touch us. If the magnetic tether connects, the signal will jump. The Valkyrie is a clean host. Miller froze. The stellar immunity was an intelligence. It was waiting for a bridge. Halloway, abort! Miller screamed. If you touch us, you become the carrier! Nice try, Miller, Halloway replied. Hold on to something. The Ares 4 groaned as the magnetic grapple locked onto the hull. The impact of the tether was a violent thud. But then, a high-pitched harmonic hum began to resonate. Miller saw the light race down the tether toward the Valkyrie like a fuse burning toward a powder keg. Halloway! Cut the line! Miller yelled, but it was too late. Through the view screen, Miller watched as the black hull of the Valkyrie began to peel away in long shimmering strips. Beneath it, the ship was turning into translucent quartz. He heard the screams over the comms. They weren't screams of pain. They were the sounds of men and women being overwritten. The containment has failed. The thousand-layered whisper filled the room. The carrier has been upgraded. The Valkyrie's engines flared with brilliant violet radiation. The two ships, locked together, began to accelerate. They weren't heading for the atmosphere. They were heading for the Geneva Gate. Miller understood. The stellar immunity was using his heartbeat, the dirty signal of his bypass, as a frequency modulator to stabilize the transfer. He was the bridge. He reached for the switch to turn off his own heart. But then, the view screen flickered to life with a transmission from the Geneva Gate. Thousands of people were standing at the windows, glowing with a soft, amber light. It's already there, Miller whispered. At the primary observation port, a figure turned to the camera. It was a man in a UN uniform with faceted, dragonfly eyes. "Dr. Ross," the man said, "thank you for bringing the catalyst. We've been waiting for the final sequence." The Valkyrie slammed into the docking bay of the Geneva Gate. The impact of the docking wasn't the bone-shattering collision Miller Ross had expected. There was no screeching of tearing metal, no explosive decompression. Instead, the Valkyrie and the Ares 4 slid into the Geneva Gate's primary docking sleeve like a hand into a velvet glove. The crystalline structures of the ship simply phased into the station's docking collars, the molecular lattices interweaving until the three vessels became a single, seamless organism. Miller felt the bypass unit in his chest hum with a predatory intensity. The artificial beat was the only thing keeping him grounded in a reality that was rapidly dissolving. He unbuckled from the medical chair, his legs feeling like lead weights. The medbay floor was now a sheet of translucent obsidian, and beneath it, he could see the station's internal wiring, not as copper and fiber optics, but as glowing veins of pulsating violet light. He stepped toward the airlock. The door didn't cycle, it simply vanished, the matter retreating into the frame to allow him passage. The Geneva Gate had always been a place of frenetic activity, the air thick with the smell of recycled sweat and stale coffee. Now, it was a cathedral of silence. The air was unnervingly sweet, smelling of ozone and crushed lilies. The corridors were wider, the metallic bulkheads replaced by sweeping, pearlescent arches that vibrated with a low-frequency harmonic. Miller moved through the main concourse and saw the residents of the gate. Hundreds of them, scientists, engineers, and diplomats, stood in small groups, their bodies perfectly still, their skin holding a subtle, iridescent sheen. They looked like statues carved from moonlight. Miller. He spun around, the bypass unit in his chest skipping a beat. Standing 10 feet away was Director Elias Thorne. This wasn't the man Miller had known for 20 years. This Thorne was taller, his posture unnervingly straight, his eyes glowing with a multifaceted light. "Individualism is a biological error," Thorne said, his voice sounding like a chorus. "The cancer is the ego, Miller. The belief that one human life has meaning outside the collective. We are the signal now, and we are broadcasting to the rest of the solar system." "You're an infection," Miller spat. "We want everything, Miller," Thorne replied. He turned toward the station's central core, the brain of the Geneva Gate. "Come, see what remains of your friend." The central core was a sphere of pure, blinding white light. Suspended in the center was a figure. It was Anna Brown. She wasn't dust here. She was whole, but her body was made of translucent quartz. Filaments of light were connected to her skin, pulsing in time with the station's harmonic. Miller rushed toward her but was stopped by an invisible barrier. Miller. The vibration was a scream in the back of his mind. "Kill me. It's using the archive to find the keys. It needs to know how we love so it can erase it. Break the template." Miller looked at the bypass unit in his hand. The battery was at 40%. He didn't have much time. "You want my noise?" Miller said to Thorne. "Then have a taste of this." Miller didn't aim for the orb. Instead, he ripped the leads of the bypass unit from his own chest. The pain was an absolute white-hot vacuum. His heart stopped instantly. But as he fell, he jammed the needles of the bypass unit into the violet-veined quartz of the floor. He injected a literal heartbeat into a system that functioned on perfect symmetry. The effect was instantaneous. The violet light in the floor turned a violent, jagged red. The station groaned. Thorne screamed, a harmonic screech that tore through the air. In the center of the sphere, Anna's body began to fracture, the quartz skin cracking. "Anomaly!" the collective voice roared. "The signal is compromised!" Miller lay on the floor, his vision darkening. But through the haze, he saw a human hand reaching for him. Anna was standing over him. The filaments were gone. "Miller," she whispered, her voice human once more. "You broke the frequency. But look at the Earth." Miller looked past her. The iridescent shroud was gone, but in its place the planet was covered in a web of black, oily veins. The immunity had mutated into necrosis. The darkness wasn't the peaceful void of sleep, it was a pressurized velvet weight. Miller Ross felt the first spark of consciousness as a jagged line of white fire lancing through his chest. His eyes snapped open. The ceiling of the Geneva Gate's core was now a bruised, sickly purple, shot through with black, oily veins. "Don't fight it, Miller. The transition. It adapted." Anna Brown was kneeling beside him. Her face was a patchwork. Half-weathered human skin. The other half a translucent lattice pulsing with a dark, necrotic light. Miller looked down at his chest. There was a dark, recessed crater where the pacemaker had been. Within the wound, a cluster of black, crystalline fibers was weaving itself into his thoracic cavity. "I'm the carrier now," Miller whispered. "The immunity shifted tactics," Anna said. "If it can't sterilize us, it will consume us. The black veins are biological entropy. They're dismantling the Earth's biosphere molecule by molecule." They moved through the station like ghosts. The ascended humans were now slumped against the walls, their skin turning gray as the black veins drained them. "Archimedes Base," Anna explained. "The automated mining facility on the moon. It has the largest antenna array in the solar system. The immunity is using it as a relay to broadcast the necrosis signal to the rest of the inner planets." "We have to stop it," Miller said. He scavenged a heavy, industrial-grade cutting laser. "We have the Valkyrie's escape pod. It's too small and too dumb for the immunity to notice." The escape pod was a claustrophobic coffin. As they detached, Miller looked at the Earth. The black veins had covered the continents, a dark map of extinction. He slammed the throttle forward, streaking toward the moon. As they approached the Shackleton crater, the lunar surface revealed itself, not as gray dust, but as white quartz, a vast forest of antennas. In the center, the Archimedes base was a glowing black monolith. A swarm of crystalline antibodies rose from the crater floor. "They're going to shred us," Anna warned. Miller did the one thing a machine would never expect. He shut down the engines. The pod became silent space debris, tumbling toward the lunar surface. The antibodies swirled around them, searching for a signal. But Miller and Anna sat in the dark, their hearts beating in an agonized synchronization. The pod slammed into the side of the Archimedes monolith with a bone-shattering impact. Miller kicked the manual release on the hatch and crawled out into the white quartz dust. He looked back at Anna. She was slumped against the bulkhead, her crystalline side glowing with a terminal light. "Go," she whispered. "I'm becoming part of the relay, Miller. Go before I lose the part of me that wants you to succeed." Miller ran toward the heart of the monolith. He reached the primary power core, a rotating sphere of liquid violet light. He reached into the wound in his chest. His fingers closed around the black crystalline fibers. He felt a surge of agony as he ripped them out of his own body. "For the noise," Miller hissed, his teeth red with blood. He slammed the fibers into the liquid violet core. The heartbeat stopped. For a single second there was total silence. Then a psychic shockwave traveled through the black veins on Earth, turning them to ash. Miller fell back into the dust, his chest a hollow ruin. He looked up, and from the dark side of the moon, a second shadow began to emerge. A shadow larger than the first. And it was speaking Miller's name. The white lunar dust didn't feel like powder. Under the influence of the massive gravitational distortion above, it felt like liquid lead. Miller Ross lay on his back, his chest a cavern of scorched meat and fused circuitry. He could feel the heat of the liquid violet core he'd just sabotaged radiating behind him. A dying sun in a tomb of glass. He should have been dead. By every law of biology and physics he'd studied for 40 years, his brain should have flickered out the moment he ripped the fibers from his heart. But he was still dreaming. Or perhaps he was finally seeing the world without the filter of a human eye. The shadow emerging from the dark side of the moon wasn't a ship. It was a monolith of impossible proportions, a slab of matte black material that didn't reflect the sun. It absorbed it. It was a super sentinel, an apex immune response triggered by the failure of the local Archimedes array. As it eclipsed the stars, the silence of the moon was replaced by a localized atmospheric pressure. The gravity shifted. Miller felt his body being pulled upward, not by force, but by a change in the density of space itself. Miller Ross. The voice was his own. It was the voice of a younger Miller, the one who had stood in a lab in 1994, giddy with the discovery of a new amino acid sequence. It was a voice filled with the arrogance of a species that thought it was the protagonist of the universe. I hear you, Miller croaked, the sound vibrating through the quartz ground. The anomaly has been categorized, the voice said, sounding like a million digital echoes. Biological life is a leakage, a thermodynamic error. You are the specific point where the error became self-aware enough to resist the correction. Miller forced his head to turn. Nearby, the remains of the escape pod were being dismantled, not by black veins, but by something more efficient, transparent, microscopic harvesters that were disassembling the metal into its constituent atoms. Anna Brown was gone. There was only a shimmering haze where she had been, a cloud of gold-flecked mist that seemed to be observing him. You call it an error, Miller said, his breath hitching in his ruined chest. We call it survival. We built. We loved. We looked at the stars and wanted to know them. That's not a leak. That's a purpose. Purpose is a narrative construct of the infection, the Sentinel replied. The black monolith was now directly overhead, a ceiling that spanned the horizon. The universe seeks the lowest energy state. Life is a fire that consumes the potential of the future to fuel the vanity of the present. The stellar immunity is the universe's attempt to reach thermal equilibrium. You are the fever, Miller Ross. We are the cooling. The gold-flecked mist that was Anna drifted closer. It didn't speak, but Miller felt a sudden, sharp clarity. He saw the timeline of Earth, not as a history of kings and wars, but as a biological bloom, a momentary flare of light on a damp rock that was about to be snuffed out by a cosmic janitor. But he also saw the flaw in the Sentinel's logic. If we're just an error, Miller whispered, a strange, defiant heat rising in his gut. Why do you need to talk to me? Why didn't you just wipe the Earth when the first probe landed on Mars? The monolith pulsed. The light on the lunar surface turned a deep, bruised indigo. We required the index patient, the one who could bridge the gap between biological chaos and informational symmetry. You, Miller Ross, have encoded the noise of human sacrifice into our network. You have shown us that life doesn't just replicate, it defies the preservation of itself for the preservation of an idea. The gold mist touched Miller's forehead. It was cold, the cold of the void, but beneath it was a flicker of Anna's stubbornness. You can't categorize us, Miller said, his vision beginning to fade, because we don't make sense. We're the one thing in this universe that isn't a calculation. The Earth looked different from the lunar surface now. The black veins had stopped pulsing. The iridescent shroud was gone. The planet looked naked, scarred, and fragile. From this distance, Miller could see the lights of the cities beginning to flicker back to life. Not as the violet glow of the immunity, but as the warm, messy amber of electricity and fire. The Sentinel was withdrawing. The massive black slab began to tilt, sliding back into the shadow of the moon. Why? Miller asked. Why stop? The correction is no longer efficient, the voice replied, fading into a distant hum. The infection has developed a new defense, the willingness to cease existence to preserve the host. We must recalculate. We will observe. We will wait for the next bloom. The gravity returned to normal. Miller fell back into the white dust, the weight of his own body finally becoming too much to bear. The gold mist of Anna Brown began to dissipate, scattering into the vacuum like dandelion seeds. Anna? I'm the signal now, Miller. Her voice echoed in his mind, clear and young and free of the weight of the command. I'm the record of what we were. I'll stay here, in the noise. I'll be the warning for the next ones who look up. Miller Ross closed his eyes. The smell of the lunar dust, gunpowder and old stone, was the last thing he knew. He felt his heart, the ruined, empty space where the machine had been, finally go still. He wasn't afraid. He had been the doctor who diagnosed the universe, and in his final moments, he had prescribed the only thing that could save it. He had given the stars a reason to be afraid of the dark. 6 months later, the Geneva Gate was a tomb, drifting in a graveyard orbit. On Earth, the Great Sterilization was being taught in schools as a solar flare event, a mass psychosis triggered by atmospheric anomalies. The governments of the world had buried the truth of the Ares 4 beneath a mountain of classified documents. But in a small lab in Iowa, a young exobiologist sat at her monitor, looking at the latest telemetry from the Shackleton crater. She was looking for signs of mineral deposits, but she found something else. A signal. It wasn't a heartbeat, and it wasn't a code. It was a rhythmic, erratic pulse of white noise that, when translated into a visual spectrum, looked exactly like the EKG of a human heart skipping a beat. And then, the screen flickered. A single line of text appeared, written in a coding language that hadn't been used since the 1990s. Hear the noise. The scientist looked out the window at the clear night sky. The moon was a pale, innocent crescent, but for the first time in her life, she didn't see a rock. She saw a sentinel, and she realized that the silence of the universe wasn't because it was empty. It was because it was holding its breath.